Welcome to LCF Tactical Transfers, where we don't just ask if a transfer could happen, we ask whether or not it should happen. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing the potential transfer of Vinicius Jr from Real Madrid to Arsenal. And of course, as an Arsenal fan, I'm going to try and look at it as objectively as I can. I am excited, but I'm going to look at it in three aspects really: tactically, financially, and realistically. So, Vinicius Jr., I mean, he's arguably one of the more kind of divisive players, I think, in the game. In the modern game, I think he does split opinion. I think, though, whether you actually enjoy watching the player play or whether you can't stand the player, I think there's something that's undeniably fascinating about the player that, when I just think of Vinicius Jr., I think of output. I think of goals. I think of nights in the Bernabeu, Champions League nights on the biggest stage, and him turning up and delivering the goods. Described as a superstar in many eyes. I think if he does join Arsenal, I think it wouldn't just be a great signing for Arsenal. I think it would be a great signing for the Premier League, because we're after losing a few of our own superstars, you could say, in the last few years. I just want to stress before I actually get into it is that this is all hypothetical. I think there's been reports from David Ornstein, who is a credible journalist. I think it does hold some weight, the story, but it's important to note that no agreement has been made, no deal is in place as of yet. Rather than simply asking whether Arsenal can sign Vinicius, I wanted to touch on something that's a bit more interesting: what would actually happen if they did. Because I don't think it's just as simple as saying that you put Vinicius into Arsenal's team and it just automatically clicks. We know that football doesn't work out that way. But the first question that people will ask: why would Vinicius leave Real Madrid? Like, we know Real Madrid. Real Madrid is Real Madrid. Like, they're the biggest European club in world football, and he's one of their biggest players. Why would you want to leave? I think there's a couple of factors why. Obviously, not to delve into a bigger discussion on the racism, but we know that Vinicius has had to put up with an awful lot in Spain, and we know the frictions what happened last year with the Benfica game and what spilled over there, and the Real Madrid manager that is going to be Vinicius manager this season is Jose Mourinho, and he was obviously quite outspoken in that incident last year. Also, Real Madrid, for them, he's 100 million plus, maybe 150 million, who knows, asset. They wouldn't want to lose him on a free next year with his contract in the final 12 months. So I wanted to look at it though from Arsenal's perspective, because it almost like it's actually amazed me with kind of the media frenzy around this potential transfer that it's almost like a lot of people are offended that Arsenal would be in for such a player, and why Vinicius would consider Arsenal as an option for the next part of his career. And I think that kind of tells us something about Arsenal at the minute. Like, this isn't the Arsenal of 10 years ago. Like, Arsenal are a club that has gone through years of a rebuild. We had to come through the other side, but in the meantime, we had to put up with a lot of jokes, being on the end of people's jokes, on the butt of jokes, and gone through a lot of criticism, and some of it possibly unfair, some of it rightly so. But this is a new Arsenal. This is an Arsenal that are Premier League champions. They're going to be the reigning defending champions, and they're competing at the top end of European football now. Like last year, getting to a Champions League final. The season before, it was a semi-final. So this is a team that is competing at the top end of European football right now. And it's a squad that is hungry for success, a manager who has built a clear identity, and we're in a healthy financial position. Arsenal, we wouldn't traditionally go for these kind of superstar players, but I think that's the point. I think that this would represent a change in Arsenal, and it would show like that the club is showing some sort of ambition. And I think that's my main kind of gripe with the whole frenzy. And it's kind of like, I think some people are just struggling to recognize that Arsenal are quite an attractive option for a player of Vinicius' calibre in the next step of his career. I think like this isn't a club that is kind of begging for a star player to join and come and rescue them. Like, this is a top club that is asking for a top player to come and join an already, what I would say is an elite defensive team. Whether we're an elite attacking and defensive team is another question, probably not, but maybe a player like Vinicius can bridge that gap between the defense and the attack that we currently have. But how would Vinicius fit under Arteta? That's a big question that I have had since the news broke of this potential deal, and that's where it gets very interesting, because I think a big reason why Arsenal have been transformed under Arteta is due to the standards that he said, and he's brought in a real kind of collective philosophy to the team. Everybody has to work hard. Everybody has defensive responsibilities, and nobody can slack. Like, you have to meet the standards, and you have to meet Arteta's non-negotiables. We've seen it last season. If you don't track a runner and it leads to a goal, you're out of the team. You only have to look at Eze last year in the Aston Villa game. Failed to track Matty Cash, and he didn't see the field for about a month after it. So when you're looking then at Vinicius Jr., like, he's quite expressive. He's quite unpredictable. He's got flashes. He's tricky. He's a player that you kind of, I suppose, you don't want to dilute in the whole defensive side of the game. And that's kind of where I'm kind of wondering, like, does Mikel Arteta allow Vinicius Jr. to be a luxury player? Because many would say he is a luxury player in the sense that you'd have to accommodate a player of his ilk. And that's the biggest kind of tactical concern that I have about Arsenal next season if he was to join. Because, look, he's not going to put in the defensive work. I think he can put in a bit of defensive work. I saw a little bit of it in his games for Brazil at the World Cup. It was few and far between, yes, but I think he can do it. I think there can be a compromise maybe between him and Arteta. I mean, put in maybe even a minimal amount of effort in the defensive side of the game and just go and win us games. Like, I think it's a case like we've seen before with teams. You only have to look at Liverpool under Klopp with Henderson. He did a lot of the dog work, a lot of the dirty work for Trent Alexander-Arnold on that side. We've seen it with Messi for Argentina. Rodrigo de Paul does a lot of the work for him, and it gives him the freedom. I think a compromise can be made, but would the squad accept it then is another thing, because you're going to be potentially bringing in a player that is going to be on the highest wage, apparently, that the club is ever going to offer. That just changes the dynamic of the dressing room of the squad. Like, I can only imagine a superstar like Vini coming in on big boy wages, and maybe some of the players in that Arsenal dressing room maybe puts their nose out of joint, and that is quite a concern that I would have. Where would Vinicius Jr. actually play if he did sign for Arsenal? Look, I think it's quite obvious he'd play on the left wing, but I think it's important to look at, the way that Arteta's system, the left winger usually operates in it, whether it be Martinelli, Trossard. It's usually what they're asked to do is to try and be disciplined on the wing, to try and maintain the width. And it's whether or not, like, if you add a Vinicius there, is he going to stay disciplined, and is he going to follow the instruction? And that is a question that I do have. Like, will he help the fullback? Will he press at the right time? Will he be able to fall in line with that? Because Vinicius, he's the type of player that maybe you just need to kind of take the shackles off and just let him do his thing, But that's kind of my area of concern, is how does he fit into Arteta's system? I talked at the end of last season about Arteta maybe possibly evolving a system and, not just doubling down on the defense, but maybe drifting away from, still have your standards of having a great defense, but maybe just sacrificing a small bit in that side. And if you do find a way to make it work, then Arsenal, they suddenly have something that they don't have at the moment, and that is a player in the forward line that opposition teams will fear. And I think that leads me to the next benefit that it would bring if you did bring in a Vinicius Jr. It would actually benefit maybe the other players in the squad, particularly Bukayo Saka, because Bukayo Saka for Arsenal, look, I think the last couple of years he's had a couple of injury hit seasons. I think he carried Arsenal through the dark moments in the early stages of Arteta's reign, and he's maybe a victim of some of that now with picking up injuries. And but I also see when he does play in the team, you often do see opposition teams, they double up on his side and they try to make that side so difficult. So what if you had a Vinicius on the left side? I can only imagine that would free up Bukayo Saka, and it would make it quite harder to try and defend against Arsenal, because you're coming up against a team that has a threat on both wings. Our attack is where we're lacking. We do need a superstar like a Vinicius to come in and hopefully take us on a new level. So the biggest question mark I would have, even if he wasn't signing for Arsenal, would be, can he handle the Premier League? Because we know players in the past have come over from Spain or Germany, France, wherever, and they find it hard to adjust to the Premier League. They find it hard to adjust to the physicality, the pace of the game, the number of games, the fact that Vinicius, he would get kicked a lot if he comes to England. There's no doubt about that. But I'd say he's used to being kicked a lot anyway, and he's shown up in Champions League nights against English opposition in the past. So I think he's well used to it. I think he'd thrive in the Premier League, to be honest with you. We're talking about one of the best left wingers in world football here, and I think maybe it's him, Kvaratskhelia, are maybe the top two at the moment. That brings me on to would I do it? If I'm Arsenal, of course, I do it. I'd take the gamble. I think it's not every day that a club like Arsenal would have the opportunity to be in the mix for a player like Vinicius Jr. This is a player that is arguably coming into his prime years, and I think it would be quite unprecedented for Real Madrid to leave the player go, because I think he's in his form years, and usually when Madrid players leave, they leave on their terms when maybe Madrid feel like they've hit their peak. This could be a perfect opportunity for the next stage of his career, and build a legacy maybe in England. I think there are risks, of course. I mean, what if he doesn't adapt? What if down the line it causes problems, frictions in the squad in terms of him being on a highest wage and him not, putting in that defensive work? I think, the defensive compromises for him, it can only go so far. If results aren't going your way, then you'll start looking at him and maybe looking at him as a problem. That's what superstar players are there to do. They're there to win you games. They're there to win you games on their own sometimes, when the team isn't playing well, and you just give the player one chance and then he just takes it, So I think Vinicius Jr. could potentially be that type of player for us. All in all, when I've said everything what I've said about the potential transfer, I'm going to contradict myself here. I don't think we'll sign him. I personally don't think we'll sign him. I think, as I said, I think trying to get a player like that out of Real Madrid, in his prime years, I just can't see it, and it would be quite unprecedented, to be honest with you. But look, if a potential deal is there, I think Arsenal should be in the mix. And if we don't get it over the line, I know opposition fans will start mocking it and whatever, but I don't think this is a saga that should be an embarrassment of the club, or you should be looking down at Arsenal for losing out on a player like Vinicius Jr. I mean, that just shows you exactly where Arsenal are at the minute. And if you can't get Vinicius Jr., go for the next one. I mean, you're saying the funds are there now for a Vinicius. If he's not available, the funds should be there for the next superstar. But that's enough for me. This is the first episode of LCF Tactical Transfers. I'd like to hear what you have to say on it. Am I talking a load of gibberish? And lastly, one for the FPL players. I'll be playing FPL as well this season. I might even do an all league and set up a Let's Chat Football league if people would be interested in that. But I have a question here. If Vinicius Jr. was to join Arsenal tomorrow, what do you reckon his FPL price would be? If you enjoyed this kind of transfer analysis video, then please, I'd ask you to consider giving it a like and subscribe for more content on this subject, because I'll be bringing a few more videos along these lines over the summer until the new club season starts up again. But until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and let's chat football.